including for a member of Congress in Washington, D.C., and within the New Mexico and Hawaii state legislature. Her professional background also includes research and internship experience with Native-led institutions, including the Native American Housing Council and the Cherokee Nation businesses, as well as research work with the IAIA, Museum of Contemporary Native Arts. In addition, she serves as the director of a nonprofit organization that provides free tennis clinics to youth in Indigenous communities. Her interests include Indigenous sovereignty, land and water rights, cultural resource protection, and international law. She plans to attend law school and pursue a career in the Indigenous and human rights law, with the intention of working at the intersection of law, public policy, and Indigenous advocacy. So if we can all give a warm welcome to our moderator, Macy.
So sorry, I knew that was going to happen once I walked up. Thank you, Sam, so much for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening for this discussion. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to our panelists for sharing their time and their perspectives with us this evening. I also want to thank the student government and Samantha for putting on this event, their leadership and support in making this conversation possible. Thank you to the audience for being here and willing to learn from new perspectives. Tonight's discussion will center on the concept of self-indigenization and the broader questions it raises about identity, responsibility, and accountability in context shaped by colonialism and occupation. These issues are not merely theoretical, they have real consequences for Indigenous people, communities, and institutions, particularly in academic, legal, and political settings. Our conversation this evening will move from personal reflections to broader structural and collective considerations. We will begin by grounding the term self-indigenization, then explore its implications for community recognition and sovereignty, before concluding with reflections on responsibility and the path moving forward. Throughout this discussion, we ask that we approach these topics with care and respect, recognizing that Indigenous identity is rooted in community, relationship, and accountability. I am honored to moderate this conversation this evening and deeply grateful to learn alongside our panelists and all of you now. Now, I would like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Kim TallBear is a citizen of the Sitzitin Wahpeton Oyate, a Dakota nation in present-day South Dakota. She is a professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, and the author of Native American DNA, Tribal Belonging, and the False Promise of Genetic Science. Let's give her a welcome. Dr. Kahala Johnnson is a Filipinx Hawaiian author who earned his PhD from the Department of Political Science here at the University of Hawaii. His work focuses on gender, queer, and polydecolonial love. Please, let's welcome him. Dr. Watson is a Kanaka researcher and lecturer here at UH Manoa, whose work integrates Hawaii's thoughtways, mo'olelo, political theory, philosophy, and earth science to advance epistemic sovereignty in Hawaii and the Pacific. Let's welcome. Thank you again, everyone, for being here this evening. To begin our conversation, I'd like us to understand the concept that brings us here together tonight. I will pass it to Dr. TallBear to introduce the term self-indigenization. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. This is the talk I gave yesterday, so I'm not going to go through all that, obviously, but I am going to call attention to this term and give a little bit of background to put context around our conversation. Okay. So I want to start with a quote by the Honorable Murray Sinclair, who is an Anishinaabe. He passed away a little over a couple years ago now. And he was the Chancellor of Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, when he said this. This was a big moment in Canada. Some of you may know, if you've got experience in Canada, when the Indian Act, their federal law, there used to be policies that were part of the Indian Act that, for example, if an Indigenous woman married a non-Indigenous person and moved off reserve, would lose her status and her children. A non-Indigenous woman could marry an Indigenous man, this was a patriarchal law, and get Indigenous status. And so as Indigenous, particularly women in Canada, fought back against that policy, self-identification became very important for Indigenous people in Canada because they were protesting the Canadian state, defining them out of existence. So when Justice Sinclair said this was a big deal. And you can read along with me. It is clear that self-identification of indigeneity no longer works. Self-declaration is an important part, but it is just the beginning. We must go beyond an honor system and include voices from Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. Queens and all universities must work in allyship to build better processes that honor Indigenous self-determination practices and approaches. And universities, nonprofits, foundations, arts organizations, even the corporate world in Canada have been pretty busy for the last 5 to 6 years coming up with policies to verify Indigenous claims. The idea being what you claim will be verified. And that's been a really interesting process to go through. In the United States, up in the 48 states, we are still deep in the sands of denial that this is a problem. But because I was in Canada for 10 years and just moved home to Dakota Homelands in Minnesota, I bring that experience of being 5 to 7 years ahead in terms of this conversation. And so I think that's why I was asked to come here, just because I have this experience. And I know this is not an easy conversation for us to have in Minnesota. I'm doing a symposium in March that could be really interesting on this topic. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean when I say self-indigenization. So I've just got some visuals up here. We've got, I know you can't see it so well. We've got so when I talk about self-indigenization, sometimes I use it instead of the term pretendianism. Pretendianism is critiqued for not being serious enough sometimes, for sounding too playful. So one of the people that I rely on to talk about this concept is Philip J. Deloria, who is the son of Vine Deloria Jr. Some of you in Indigenous Studies will have read Vine Deloria's work. Phil Deloria is a historian. He's at Harvard now. They're enrolled Standing Rock Sioux, and from my home state of South Dakota. So Phil Deloria published a book in 1998 called Playing Indian. That's another term that we use. And in that book, he did this kind of historical tour through the US, the United States, proclivity for playing Indian. He starts in 1773 with the Boston Tea Party. Remember, they dressed up as Indians. He talks about the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, campfire girls. So here we've got a picture from 1966 in this US state of Florida of boys dancing in faux Indian regalia. Here we have the classic pretendian, Iron Eyes Cody, who was in the Crying Indian Keep America Beautiful ad, so Keep America Beautiful. Up above that, you've got the Chief Illini's Last Dance, Boo Hoo. In 2007, they had to officially get rid of the mascot. That's at the University of Illinois. The American, I don't remember, I think it was called American Indian Studies at Illinois. Somebody in here may correct me if I'm wrong, was decimated after this happened. And then over on the right, you have the Department of Homeland Security. It has always deeply offended me that these settlers dare call that the Department of Homeland Security. So to give you some insights from Phil Deloria's Playing Indian, I'm just going to go to the next slide and show you the cover, and then I'll come back to this one. So that's the first edition of the book. It has since been released in a second edition. So this is the background he gives us in that book that'll help you understand why I group all these images together. The Indians ever predicted an inevitable death under the advancing wheels of North American civilization dates back to the beginning of colonization. The vanishing Indian motif is central to what Phil Deloria called playing Indian. Only when the Indian was seen as conquered and dying were Americans able to turn him from an object of derision to be exterminated into a romantic icon of American heritage. In his 1998 book, Deloria traced the origins and the earlier practices of dressing up and performing Indianness in the United States. His historical account again begins in the 19th century. It winds through the 19th and 20th centuries. And then finally in the book, he also discusses 1980s appropriations of Indian spirituality. Now, in that book, again published in 1998, Deloria barely mentioned the most recent iteration of settler state citizens' centuries of Indian play, what is often today called pretendianism or indigenous identity fraud, and again illustrated on this slide by Iron Eyes Cody. Now, imagine 1998, though, and talking about this issue. We have a hard enough time talking about this today. I gave a talk on the Elizabeth Warren case at Harvard back in 2018 when she was running for the nomination for Democratic Party nomination for US President. And it was History of Science, interestingly, that invited me to give the talk because at the time, remember, she had just released her DNA test results. And I talked about why genetic ancestry testing cannot link you definitively to a place-based indigenous people, that these are continental level markers found in lower and higher frequencies throughout different continents of the world. And as we know in Turtle Island, we've got hundreds, if not thousands of indigenous nations, and we may all share in different frequencies these quote unquote Native American markers. So I went to Harvard and gave that talk about Elizabeth Warren, and Phil Deloria was in the room, and at the end he said, gosh, it didn't occur to me, I don't know, I hope it's okay that I say this, I like Phil, but he said it didn't occur to me to write that chapter, and I didn't believe him. I'm like, Phil, really? Because I don't think you could have written that chapter in 1998. Like, the heavens would have opened and there would have been terrible lightning and thunder and terrible things would have happened to him. But he gives us the historical scaffolding in this book to make this argument today, and I am very grateful for his historical work. So, one of the things I think we have to remember is that indigeneity is a rights-bearing category. In North America and internationally, and particularly since the 1990s, it's become this kind of global idea that links us together. I'm able to be in this room and have conversations with people and talk about our common struggles, right? We learn lessons of decolonization from each other. This has been a very important concept. It is also a concept that is being used so promiscuously that it is enabling people who do not have these place-based co-constitutions between a people or an indigenous nation and a land or a waterscape, but who are just thinking in terms of their individual ancestry going back to a continent. They are actually extracting and appropriating this term to make claims of rights for themselves. So because indigeneity is a global concept and it's a rights-bearing concept, and because whiteness is a global concept, whiteness will appropriate every last thing. This is what it will do. And now, because they were not able to fully exterminate us or eliminate us completely on paper, they will now become us. This is a final act of colonial appropriation, and we see this in the Department of Homeland Security. It's really offensive, really, and look at how they're acting. I mean, I'm coming to you from Minneapolis. So you've got these ICE agents on the streets terrorizing, beating people, right? People of color, also white people, are coming out. And it's been really interesting to watch, especially white liberals in Minnesota and around North America, be terrified, lament what ICE is doing. It's great that they're out on the streets, but when they say this is not us, they need to read a history book. Everything ICE is doing to Native and non-Native people on the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul, that is how the white supremacists secured our land base. They starved people out. They put them in prison camps. They are now putting protesters they're arresting into a building that is right next door to the prison camp they put my Dakota ancestors in 1862. They then moved people out onto reservations after a few years in the prisons. They call them concentration camps. They hung in a mass execution, the largest mass execution in the United States in 1862, 38 Dakota men plus 2 more. Abraham Lincoln signed their death order. There is nothing ICE is doing that outstrips the violence and the dispossession that they did in 1862, and we need to remember that. The white supremacist state will do what it needs to do to maintain this land, and they're doing the same things they did to take and secure the land. So this is not fundamentally different than how they came to occupy that territory. All of this together is self-indigenization. Pretendianism is one form of it. And I will close with saying, I've been critiqued a lot, well, why aren't you working on more important issues? And my response is always, all of these issues are entangled. I work on what I work on because I got called into this conversation by the media largely, wanting me to comment on the use of genetic ancestry testing. The very first interview I did on pretendianism was about Elizabeth Warren in 2012, when her Republican detractors were saying, why can't she just take a DNA test? And I said, that won't help. And so since 2012, I've been called hundreds of times to make commentary in the media. I did not come to research this predicament or problem. This is the last thing I wanted to work on. I have taken a tremendous amount of hate on social media and in person for doing this. But because I was called in as an expert on the applicability of DNA to Indigenous quote-unquote identity, that's why I got into it. I'm also tenured, I'm enrolled in my tribe, I grew up in my community, my chair and my dean have had my back. This is why I do this work, because I am relatively speaking safe from the repercussions, the social and economic repercussions of doing this work. There are a lot of other, especially Indigenous women who are behind the scenes doing this work, who are fearful of speaking out, because they are maligned on social media, they are attacked, they're afraid of losing their jobs. I've had women write me say, my children are being bullied. So this is why I do this work, because I can. And not everybody can do this work. So I think I'm at my 10 minutes, right? Okay, so I will stop. That's my intro to self-indigenization, and I want you to help understand the broader context in which this is an important issue to talk about. It's the issue I work on, it's not the issue everybody works on. Everybody works on their own. You know, we bring our personalities, our dispositions, and our skill set to work on the issues that are important for Indigenous peoples. We don't all have to work on the same thing, and we should not be ranking our priorities in an order of hierarchy, right? We need everybody to do different things in support of our people's sovereignty and well-being. So, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. TallBear, for enlightening us. We are now hearing from Dr. Watson on the term faux Naka.
Aloha. Talk about improv. I'm not mic'd because there was feedback. So I'm going to talk loud and hopefully everyone can hear me. So, mahalo everybody for coming, and yes, this is a super important discussion. And it's interesting, I thank Dr. TallBear for her brilliance and the work of sharing what you're born to do, right? And how we do things is each of us has to be different. And yeah, I joke because something she said, that idea of being two-placed. For me, my strength is humor. And again, I'm not sure if I should say this out loud, because sometimes I color in the danger zone. But if I don't couch what I see in the universe and what I experience in my body in humor, chances are that my knowledge of chemistry, engineering, you should check suspicious packages. You know what I mean? Like I go, like if I don't cover this rage with humor, then it's all gone. So I have to be playful. I have to see us existing in the academy, us existing in Hawai'i as a game, because I want to continue playing it. And I see a day when all of us can play it together, and that there's more chances for everybody to win, and not just some people's and not other people's. Does that make sense? So with that, the idea of pretendian, I go, what is a Hawai'i version of a pretendian? And so what I say, I decided it was a faux naka, like F-A-U-X-N-A-K-A. Because I identify myself as a bush naka from Kahalu, from the back of the valley of Ahui Manu. And although I present as a Krakanaka, because if I wanted to present as white presenting, I would have to focus and speak good English. But I could play the game like that if I didn't have morals. But anyways, so I've been using the word Fonaka because in Hawaii, there is this experience of, what Dr. TallBear is saying. Like people taking really taking up choke space. And especially like I'm in where earth science meets Mo'olelo and Ike Hawaii. And there are people that occupy positions that were designed for an indigenous person or a Hawaii voice. But instead, you have these people that identify as Hawaiian, and my deal is Hawaiian is a haole word. So if I put pineapples on everybody's heads, every single one of you is Hawaiian, right? They control the definition of that. And so, anyways, with that, this idea of Fonaka and power, and what Dr. TallBear introduces us to is kind of considering why does someone want to be what they're not? And again, I have the privilege of being born in Hawaii, to Hawaii, where from my father's side can trace till time immemorial. And so I don't know what it's like. I wish I was Hawaiian. I don't know what that's like. I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, random haole because my mom was adopted, so she's a Caucasian of some sort. So sorry, I never do the DNA test. But with that in mind, I don't know what that is, right? I've never like yawned and I go like, you know what, everybody call me Satoru because I'm Japanese, right? Like I've never understood it. And so Dr. TallBear invites us to ask the question, like what is the purpose of identifying of what others would say you are not? And for whom does it serve? So when I ask myself as a Krakanaka that if I could play the white game and speak good English and, have no morals, I think I could pull it off. It would take a lot of focus though, because pigeon is the first language. But what would be the purpose and who would be in service to me? Truthfully, the purpose would be so that I can get a job at UH Manoa. Because I am unhireable, if you've ever taken my class. But I'm also good at what I do and playing the game, right? So, but who would that be in service to? It'd be to my family, my partner, my children, our dogs, the chickens, right? Like, we could feed that. But I play the game a little bit dangerously and I don't do that. And I instead do what I do in the infiltration that I can as I play this game of the university. Maybe a little bit dangerous, kind of the hokey pokey, like, ooh, whack the electric fence every once in a while. Who benefits from that, right? What is the purpose and who does it serve? And for me, I am Hawaii. The work I do is for Hawaii and by Hawaii because I know, although I have no hope in institutions, I have hope in people. And for every student I have in the classroom, I see a whole bunch of people that can dream better tomorrows that are not possible. Because like Dr. TallBear pointed out, like it was because this generation and this generation that I'm able to do what I can in my generation. And I know that the next generation can push even further. But it's up to me to push as far as I can go, see where the barbed wire is, catch some scars, and know that they can go further next time. Does that make sense? And that's my 5 minutes, is that good? Okay, mahalo, kahala. Thank you.
I think we're standing. That's the vibe, the mood. All right. Okay, aloha, my name is Kahala, and I'm coming here tonight to talk about, I'll say a shadow or complement of what Kim and Kaimi are talking about, and that is what happens when retaliation occurs against those who report self-indigenization. I argue that retaliation is the protector of self-indigenization, which is settler colonial elimination. I come here tonight also aware and being as a Kanaka Maoli, as a kia'i, as a practitioner of ana, which the West says witchcraft, but it's justice for us, especially today. But as someone who knows what it means to speak out, to call out or in and receive retaliation, not just from those who are settlers, but also, unfortunately, from our own lahui, or those within our community, which is another layer of pain. But I also come here with a genealogy that stretches to a mentor of mine, who I will not name because we're being professional, but who has affected me. He's contributed to my political genealogy, someone who has taught me direct action, cadre formation and mobilization, narrative control, how to create strategy, tactical operations within activism. And this person is a self-indigenizer, someone in our community who takes not just space, but money and resources. That's disappointing. There's a grief there. Even though I know that this is harm, there's a grief there, and that's real. We feel that in our bodies. And I think it's important for me to say that, because oftentimes when we speak about this issue, we're treated as monsters. We're treated as unfeeling, as callous, as people who are just out there and aggressive to get this person. And that's not actually true, especially when that person is so close to our community, so close to the work that I do. My main points are: retaliation as elimination takes a couple of forms. It's easy for people when they retaliate to ignore completely any of these reports of self-indigenization. Ignoring, one. Two, outright excusing. Oh, yeah, that person is yes, we accept that, and he's such a good person. He does so much for our lahui. He's engaged in so much social justice for our people. Excusing. Three, outright punishing. And we see the overlap between the kinds of retaliation that happens to reporters of self-indigenization, who report about self-indigenization. We see the same kinds of punishment, where rather than gathering around these people and providing them care and support, we instead treat them as if they are the perpetrators, as if they are the people causing harm, those who offend. And four, reversal. So taking our own kinship as Kanaka. Yeah, we have a very large ohana. We have lots of inclusiveness within our kinship. Settlers will take that, self-indigenizers will take that, and they will turn it against us. Why are you being like that? We love everybody. Yeah? Oh, you're queer. Don't you have all, that's relationships. We need to show queer love to these people. That's not abolitionist. This is punishment, calling people out. And the problem with that is that the power asymmetries and material imbalances are not being seen. And it's individualized to the reporter rather than seeing self-indigenization and retaliation as part of a larger system meant to punish, discipline, silence us. But it can be interrupted. I believe that there's dual power involved, which means building what Kim is talking about within institutions to have accountability there, but also within our communities. We need to do better to be able to care for and center the most harmed, and center the people who report their needs, their safety, their care. That's my work as somebody who works in transformative justice and community accountability, helping those who are survivors of gendered and sexual violence, both from external, from outside our movement and our community, and within it. Yeah, I believe that's possible. I believe we need to take up that work. And then lastly, something I just want to, my final point here is we don't often see what happens when self-indigenization occurs and retaliation follows. To those who are watching and witnessing this happen within our communities, within online. And who I'm talking about are people who are marginalized within our own Native communities. So, one, Black Kanaka, who are constantly having to prove, because of blood quantum and racialized ideas, that they are Kanaka, because there's an anti-Blackness within our community that constantly polices, surveils, and pushes them out. Two, Mahu, queer, and trans Kanaka, who are constantly not only having to explain, validate their own gender identity or sexual expression, but are also seen as dangerous to us, and particularly these calls, MAGA, about danger to kids. Three, diasporic Kanaka, Kanaka who are not born here, who lived in the diaspora, who have come back and are constantly posed to perform authenticity more than self-indigenizers, more than anyone else. 4, are surviving, Kanaka who are survivors, the groups that I work with, who are routinely disbelieved and pushed out for speaking out. And the last one there are many more, but the last one I want to talk about is the group that I work with right now, unsheltered Kanaka, who are seen as less than even our land. We don't care for our unsheltered enough. We push them out to the margins, to the street. We oftentimes care for the land, the Aina, more than them. And the reason why I bring this up is not to make us feel guilt and shame. These are painful, but it's to let us realize that when we are protecting, defending self-indigenizers, these groups of marginal Kanaka within our community are seeing this happen and asking, why are you not doing that for me? I ask that. Why aren't you defending me, your people, your kia'i? Why do you not protect me? Painful truths, but in order for us to grow, to heal, and more importantly, to build the structures of accountability and the culture of care that's required to prevent self-indigenization from happening and end retaliation, we need to start with that. Aloha.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I want to offer the floor if our panelists want to discuss their thoughts with each other on their subjects. Thank you.
Oh, I would have been taking notes because I was thinking about what you each were saying. Do you have something you want to start with?
I'll start.
Okay, yeah.
Because the thing that I want to, again, like, what is your purpose and who is it in service to? What is the purpose of identifying as something that you're not? What is the purpose of erasing names of space, right? Genocide is a Haole word. But Hawai'i in 1895, this brilliant thinker used the word ho'ohaole. So when you think about the ho'ohaole, it didn't just happen to people, but it happened to the plants and then happened to the land as well. In the changing the name, so the name becomes foreign to itself and translated outside of its body. So I wanted to put that out there, because again, I'm not sure for Native Americans and different nations, but race and that idea of racism is Hawaiian like the pineapple on the pizza, right? It's foreign to our understanding of our own identities. But we live in a space that is racialized and has been racialized under this malu of America. So in that, I want to think about the ideas of innocence and the need to feel innocent, belonging, and the need to feel that one belongs. But in the case of the Fonaka and the self-indigenizer, it's like belonging without being long, right? Like take the word belong and going being long in a place. Then the benefits of ignorance, right? Because yeah, that was mentioned like the Constitution and we the people never, for Native Americans was the merciless savages is in the Declaration of Independence. And then if you were black, you were like so much of a human. So the we the people was them, you know what I mean, not us. And then that idea of authority, like the ability to make decisions. So epistemic authority, like to be considered a knower. And then the other one is a moral authority, the one that knows what is right and what is good. And so as we're thinking about all these things, like this idea of like, I want to feel innocent, like don't blame me for what happened 100 years ago, in the words of Nalani McDougall. But yeah, innocence, accountability, ignorance, authority, and then belonging and being long. Yeah, mahalo, that's my 2 cents.
Something you said, should I say something? Something you said, I don't remember exactly what, but it made me think of one of the people I quote when I write about this is Cheryl Harris, who's a UCLA law school professor who wrote a really important 1993 Harvard Law Review article called Whiteness is Property. And in that article, she talked about whiteness being such a valued thing that it becomes a form of property. And the people that get to claim whiteness, because they're trying to solidify the parameters of whiteness such that fewer people have access to the benefits of whiteness rather than more, they are the ones that seize the right to define others. And so some of the, and it's been really interesting to comment on and know many of these self-indigenizers through the years. These are the people the cases that I have commented on, these are almost always quote unquote progressive people who are claiming to be doing good for our communities. But what they are also doing is benefiting, they are taking advantage of their whiteness by insisting on the power to define themselves as Cherokee, even when Cherokee don't claim them like that. It's not that you can't be a friend to Cherokee people. It's not that we have plenty of non-Indigenous people who work with and on behalf of our communities, who are good relatives to us. But being a relative to us doesn't mean you are us, right? I have relatives that are white. I have relatives that are black. And some of my relatives who are white and who are black are also tribal, but not all of them. And so this is them, I think, benefiting, and I'm talking about a lot of the white indigenizers now. We could talk about people of color that self-indigenize. I would still say that's taking advantage of, or that's happening within a white supremacist system that allows them to define us, right? And they will redefine us in order to become us if they need to. So that's kind of, anyway, that's kind of what I talked a lot about that yesterday.
Yeah, that is something I was thinking about, is when people of color or settlers of color utilize white supremacy and the architecture that's been placed there to be able to self-indigenize. That's something that I find more common here in Hawaii, because white folks are actually not the majority. There's more folks of color. And so I've long thought about and pondered how those dynamics work out here. But I did want to ask, I wasn't there at the talk but yesterday, but I did want to ask, what differences do you see in terms of the Canadian versus the American context in terms of universities doing or not doing something about self-indigenization?
Yeah, it's not that Canadians are better white people. There are structural differences between the US and Canada, the 48 states and Canada, that make it such that Canada is farther along in addressing this problem. One of the reasons I moved there in 2015 and I left in 2025 is because I wanted to be in a place where Indigenous people were on the national radar. And so Indigenous people in Canada are hyper visible. In the US, across many parts of the 48 states, we are very erased. We might be hyper visible in South Dakota, New Mexico, Arizona, but across much of the continental US, we are very much erased. And so because Indigenous people are so hyper visible, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit in Canada, and they, I think, are a greater proportion of the population. This is why I think they are farther ahead on this issue. They also have laws that really very explicitly allow you to do an Indigenous hire, and those things have been under assault in the United States. So it is really the hypervisibility and the structural, the population, I think, that has made these things happen in Canada. It's not because white people are more enlightened. I would not say that's true. Indigenous people, I feel like in Canada also, one of the things I learned there is they're in general, much more critical of the settler state and can see beyond the settler state in the way that many US-based Indigenous people have a harder time. It's hard to live inside a superpower. It's really hard to live inside a place with this kind of military, right? And see the possibilities of existing as peoples in relationship with one another outside of a US framework. So I think that's why, yeah.
and then how aloha is being defined for us, right? The Hawaiian dictionary, the Hawaiian English dictionary was made for who? Not for Nakas. You know why? Because we already spoke the language. You never need to look them up. A dictionary is a tool for others to use. And so Andrews made the dictionary in 1848 and 49, not for Hawaiians to look up words, trust, right? Was for missionaries to translate Hawaii into a Christian corpus. The dictionary that came after, Pukui Albert in the 70s, 80s, was to translate that Christian corpus into a contemporary American, modern American corpus. But even in our definitions of aloha, now we have the aloha of Jesus, not the aloha of maybe umiali loa, right? Like I can kill somebody if you act out of pocket, right? Mako was killed because, not because of hatred, but because there was so much aloha for the community, for the aina, that this person that was a junk leader needed to be taken out. And he was killed with aloha, right? And then we have the word haole, which I get busted for using all the time. But again, haole is a Hawaii word. But where did people learn the word? Where did Joey Carter think that it was a swear word, like the N-word? Why can the Kamehameha schools, an indigenous boarding school, which I graduated from, /survived, doesn't want to use haole brownies anymore? They cannot serve haole brownies, they call them Kamehameha brownies, but they serve plantation iced tea. Which one has a longer history of violence and people actually bled and died? Right? Think about that. But who gets upset by the word haole? And who has the power to define? Right? So I want to think about that. And then the other thing that you said, in this progress of what self-indigenization is and how you make a land that is not your land, your homeland, such that you're pushing other people's out. You know what I mean? Like this idea of uncharismatic megafauna. And I write about the Pacific, right? Everybody's like, oh, the Caucasians, let's save the whales and let's save the dolphins. But all you nappy-headed coconut eaters can jive. Because we're the uncharismatic megafauna that disrupts the paradise that they wish they found. The Eden that they got kicked out of, right? The coconut eaters occupy them. We have to get rid of them unless they become cute and performative. And yeah, that dances, right? For the show, but not a dangerous indigenous person. So this idea of uncharismatic megafauna is how we're being treated. And then what does it mean to be that and to own that? That kind of label that is thrust upon us, because I think it's cute. But how do we exist in spaces like that? And like things to think about. Really, yeah, because they'll rally to save the whale, do $1 million to do a snail, but our houseless uncles, right, and our houseless aunties, our houseless like Hawaii Oiwi, that have been here since been. Lucky if people give them $1 and throw them as they walk by. Oh, they're gonna use it for alcohol. You know what I mean? So yeah, things to think about. So Maha.
For the record, you're very charismatic. Just so you know. Killing with aloha. That's a really interesting thing. Not just from the Mo'olelo, the story, but the awareness, I think, of like taking action, direct action, in order to care for the other relations around. And I think that's something that the weaponized version of aloha is used as a retaliation, right? Why aren't you showing love for so-and-so who is posing as someone who they're not, and not necessarily having to deal with all the things that we have to deal with as Kanaka? I think that's something that I've encountered a lot in our community. And it's a strength. We are people of aloha. We do have love. We have care. Yes, absolutely. And like that retaliation and settler technique I talked about, assimilating and reversing, those very aspects of our culture and our kinship are so quickly taken and translated into, or mistranslated or interpolated into what's comfortable for the settler, for the self-indigenizer. And that's challenging because it's hard to go up against the aunties and uncles being like, it's not, like, why aren't you showing aloha? It's like, it's not about aloha, it's about power. It's about elimination. It's about not being heard or defended, not just ourselves, but all those marginal Kanaka that I talk about. And witnessing that, we gotta be real. To have aloha in the way that chief did in that story, I'm not advocating that kind of level of violence today. You're not gonna get away with it, but accountability. That's what it feels like for a lot of the people that we call /in, is if we're trying to kill them, when in reality, that's what's happening to us. So, just some thoughts.
One of the things you mentioned is a pattern that we've seen in Canada in particular, and they call it grooming elders. And so elders get groomed by self-indigenizers. And I wonder, I haven't studied this, but I've been around a lot of these cases. Our elders grew up in a time in which there was violent, explicit anti-indigeneity, right? And so to them, who were in physical danger, right, of violence, had to listen to disparaging, racist language every single day, even if they walked down the street. This seems like, well, they want to be like us. They appreciate us, right? And so it's been difficult to, and you're right, it's hard to speak to an elder about this stuff, and you can't it's really hard to call into question their sense of wanting to include, right? Because it's such a stark difference for them. But I think this elder grooming is a really interesting term that people have come up with, right? Because again, people are acting extractive with them. They're extracting their care. They might be extracting the relationship in order to, they'll be trying to get close to an elder that's got ceremonial knowledge, right? Instead of caring for them and treating that with a kind of respect. I don't know what your culture is like, but in my culture, you don't have a right to know everything. And I don't get to just go home and push my way into a ceremony that I have not been invited to, or that I have not been prepared to go to. There's a lot of preparation for some of our ceremonies. And I would go home and be like, well, I don't have a right to be in there. I'm not ready. It's just not my place right now. And so we know when we grow up in community how to treat these things with care and with humility. And a lot self-indigenizers approach this, I have a right. I have a gaping wound. I was disconnected. It's my right to come back and have this. And that a lot of times just tells me they don't actually have any kind of relationship with community in a sense of understanding of their place in that community, which is we don't all have a right to every single thing in our community. So.
Mahalo. I'm turning on like an indigenous sovereignty thing that goes along with that, right? So the line that I use is, Ike is not free Ike, right? Like this idea of the right to know. And then when you talk about elder grooming, I call them mana vampires. Like they take the power they're like leeches that grab on and then glean whatever blood, whatever mana they can get from our elders and from our kupuna or people that are Ike practitioners. And they do that and then they weaponize it or take that because they have the right and they did the learn and they did the work. Now they have epistemic authority over who gets to be in ceremony and who doesn't. And I'm gonna name a name right now, so buckle up. William Wilson, Kahakula, the head at that time of the Hawaiian Language Revitalization Program Department, who is not Hawaii. But he said that he was more Hawaii than Haunanike Trask because he could speak Hawaiian, right? So then he learns this language from our ancestors, from our community, does this, and then uses it to say that he is more Hawaiian than Haunani-Kay Trask, who, like, we are taught, I'm going to go, Indigenous boarding school survivor, as a boarder, right? Like, we were taught that Hawaiians used to do this. If you want to be a good Hawaiian, if you want to be on the OEV edge, you have to basically abandon all those things to do these new, modern, contemporary things, right? Then you become ashamed of what that was, except for I can sing a song and I can chant a chant and I can dance at the drop of a dime, right? I'm trained for that. But everything else was ancient Hawaiians used to, your ancestors used to, right? Like that line, ancient Hawaiians used to grow kalo. I got some in my front yard, right? Like, but that idea of making us past and making us past tense, and then in terms of the academy, like how it's weaponized as Native Hawaiian place of learning, where everyone, and even in the policies of this university, they talk about the story of Haloa and the Kumulipo or whatever, and how everything is born. And there are pictures of kalo, of Haloa, all over this campus, through brochures on the website. You can see it everywhere. Where can you eat it? Is it served in our dining halls? Is it served at the Starbucks or the Subway? Right? It's something to see but not to sustain. Yeah? To like admire but not fortify. And so even in like the most subtlest of ways, how we're translated out of the body, out of the aina, out of this, into some image of the fantasy, right? Of what we want, these native savage coconut eating megafauna to become charismatic as how we want them. We want them to be cute in this way, but not dangerous in that way. So Haunani-Kay Trask can't be the Hawaiian, or as Hawaiian as Pila is, because hikiaya ke ola Hawaii. You know what I mean? And that then this idea of identity through grooming, and then people supporting him. Like right now, I'm sure if someone sees this, I will get busted from the Olala Hawaii community, but they used to me, and they're used to busting me as well, for saying that about him. Because he is a hero of Hawaiian language revitalization. I clap it up for him. That's fantastic. But then when you weaponize that skill that you learn, that you're able to navigate an academy, to glean from our communities, and then say, I, as a not Hawaii person, am more Hawaii than that person who is a Hawaii person that has lived through different experiences, sometimes because attending an Indigenous boarding school teaches you to distance yourself. When we were talking about race and like, I didn't realize I was white or white passing Krakanaka until I got to this campus in 1992, because I grew up in a Hawaii community and I went to Indigenous boarding school. I wasn't racialized as white. I was a bush Naka like all other Nakas, and one of my classmates, who's black Hawaii, we got to campus, and after the first week, I go like, Charlie, and she's like, what? She's all, and she told me, I go, how you doing? She's all like, brother, I'm black. I go, I know, I'm howling. Like, but this is the first lesson I learned at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, was outside of my community, I became something else. And I'm gonna say, like I talk about, I'm playing the game of the academy. If I was darker of skin, if I was more muscly, right? If I was nappy of hair and brown of eye, if I was incapable of putting on this European language, English, with an accent consistent with the North American continent, if I was incapable of doing that, I wouldn't have accomplished the things that I've accomplished so far. Right, like, so I understand that it is a privilege that I have, that I guess I could play a game at least for short distances, or I'm less spooky than someone that is darker of skin. And you know, like, and understanding that too is a weird space for me. But yeah, mahalo, that's 5 cents.
I think you mentioned something, Kaimi, that implicitly that the university is one of the largest self-indigenizers in our island. Let's just put it there. And another thing too, like bringing up Pila, with language revitalization, there's a very zombie-like aspect to that word, because I came to know this while I was studying Olelo. The language can live without Kanaka. Let me just repeat that again. The language can actually go on without any Kanaka being alive. And that is something that I don't think we teach enough, because I applaud folks, non-Kanaka, who come to learn Olelo. That's important, yeah, to be able to engage in that part of our movement. And there's that line where it becomes a marker of identity, a right to being Kanaka, or even in this case, that reversal, right? More Kanaka than actual Kanaka. And that is something that, unfortunately, a depoliticized or apolitical language revitalization or language immersion program will put out, unless it is politically countered. I don't want us to be gone and our language to be spoken purely by non-Kanakas, which is absolutely possible. Just let that sink in. I'll name two, since my brother over here is naming. My mentor is man of color, Andre Perez. There's a question on that man's genealogy. And we've been attacked, Native women, in particular, Kanaka women, Kanaka men, and the attacks have been very individual. Again, focusing on the reporters and not a focus of supporting and caring for them and creating teams who can, or authority figures who can intervene, right? But rather, like community members standing up, accounting for them. Or, yeah, this doesn't go out. But it's sad because I'm working with, I am a Kanaka who is close to being unsheltered, and the amount of money and financial resources self-indigenizers are able to access, take, hold, invest, that can pay for all the people that we do outreach with back on Maui, our unsheltered community, So it's not just about individuals like, oh, I have this hate program or agenda. Again, demonizing, making me a monster, that is that megafauna, right? That uncharismatic megafauna. Push that aside, and what I'm standing for are all these Kanaka beneath me on the hierarchy, who are suffering daily when self-indigenizers and settlers in general are able to access things that are meant for us, including our very identity, including our rights to belong, our kuleana to belong to each other. Make space for that. I guess that's a kuleana I'm going to give to the non-Kanaka in this room. Instead of trying to be us, instead of trying to take our resources, make space for us to belong. And that can look like taking the labor off of those who are reporting, so that they are the targets. So Kim, Kaimi, or I, or any other of my brothers and sisters do not need to be the targets. So we have so much belonging we have to do with each other. Let us do that.
I think our moderator has questions for us.
Yes, thank you. And thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. I just want to reiterate the topic of not only protecting our youth, but protecting our elders. And that is one similarity we do have here in Hawaii and on the mainland. So I would like to pose the question, what are some similarities between what is happening with self-indigenization on Turtle Island and here in Hawaii?
Is that for me? Well, I don't have expertise down here. I can tell you the patterns I've heard you talk about. I don't remember which one of you it was. It was the language revitalization, right? So we've seen that as well around, our Lakota, Dakota language. One of the things that reminded me when you were talking about that is it's an example of when somebody says, well, I know the language, therefore I'm more, you than you are. what that's doing is individualizing, and this is why I have trouble with the word identity too. I'm not talking about identity when I'm critiquing Indigenous quote-unquote identity fraud or self-indigenization. That's another quote by Phil Deloria I left out. The American national identity crisis. It is them that are having an identity crisis. It's their identity that's a problem for them. And they treat identity like an individual inheritance. My identity, my ancestors, my heritage, my. It's very anti-relational. And when I think about, how our languages emerge and how we emerge as Indigenous peoples in place, our languages reflect the non-humans with whom we are in relation, right? We don't just as humans make those languages. Those languages are made in conversation with the places and the other beings where those are. And so, what kind of language would you have if all of your people were dead? It might be a pretty dead language, right? And so I think understanding that what it is to be your people, that is a collective thing. So when I'm talking about a collective, when I talk about this problem, do you belong to the collective? Are you in relation with the collective? Is that where your genealogy comes from? Or are you treating this like a sort of individual accomplishment and a set of properties? And they treat it like property, and which is why they insist on privacy when you ask questions. I don't know about all of you, but where I come from, when we're like, who are you? Who's your mom? Who's your cousin? I met this other Dene Navajo person, we try to make connections, right? And so we're really interested and I'm always happy to talk about who my relatives are. And I'm happy when somebody says, oh, I knew your grandma and she did this, and by the way, this person is your fourth cousin, and I didn't know that, right? And so it's because our kinship is not private. It is not like a private belonging that we have to hold and be stingy with and hide away somewhere like a piece of gold. And so when somebody is very private, insists that it's private, insists that it's individual, that tells me right away that we're not talking about the same thing. I'm talking about being in relation with a collective, and they're talking about claiming that identity as a form of property that they get to hang on to. These are very different things. And so, going back to the language, I'm not a language revitalization expert, but I would assume that part of that work is about ensuring the vibrance and the aliveness of the collective, right? And language is part of that aliveness. So anyway, but I don't know if they have other comparisons they want to make. I haven't thought about this phenomena in Hawaii very much. I really do stick to the US and Canada. I do have conversations with people that are Sami as well, and I have had some conversations with people in Australia and Aotearoa. Yeah.
Mahalo. I think, and the idea, when Dr. Calder was talking about the idea of this promiscuity of this depth of becoming. The word that I use is displacement, but I use a Y instead of a I because I see it as a disease, like it's viral. And so, in terms of sameness and differentness, Hawaii has the benefit, at least for the most part. Right now, it's kind of changed because more than 50% of people that are but I never see her since high school, right? And then, like, who is who? And then her husband is married, and then my classmates, and then her husband, the brother-in-law and the sister-in-law. And I was at their house with the brother and the sister-in-law just 2 weeks ago, right? So because of this idea of wonderfully big islands and a huge ocean, but again, that connectedness and the benefit of belonging that comes from being long, because we have never been displaced from this place, that finding those connections are so easy, but at the same time, calling out the self-indigenizer is also so difficult, because, oh, that's the kind's next door neighbor. Or, you know what I mean? Because it's an island. Because, oh, I'm going to see them tomorrow when we ride bus together. Because of this shared space and shared time, and then fantasies of aloha, and then this true desire. Because again, like, if there's like people talk about decolonizing, I don't decolonize, because I go, that's just an unsomething, right? But from the right, I go, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm not going there, right? It's to decolonize. I just know to be colony. And again, like I said, haole is a Hawai'i word. So I use the words ho'o haole as was used in Nupepa, and ho'o Hawaii. So to make this space dissonant with itself, or make this space resonant with itself. And so when we speak our language and sing the songs and dance to the rains, that I have resonated with this space. Because we wasn't like Adam and Eve with a label maker going chair, pig, donkey, right? Our Aina told us its names. Yeah, like it shared its names with us, and that's how we learned its names. I never named the rain. The rain told me what their name was as it sang, as it touched against my skin. And so this idea of possessing and identifying, I cannot say I am Hawaii if Hawaii no sing back to me, right? And those people, in terms of even the aina and the plants and the kai, I sing to it, it sings back to me. That is that idea of belonging, yeah? That is outside of this race and identities that I can possess. I go, if I could wash the naka off of me, would I do it? Probably not. It would make life easier, but I can't, right? In the same way I cannot wear what they, like, it's time. I love the word, like, I use the word oiwi for Kanaka oiwi, because that idea of o, like okina, o with a ko on top is like ish, right? Like reddish. Like o lau is the taro leaf when it's still furled but never come out furled yet. It's a leaf-ish. And oiwi, like bone as ancestor, is not an ancestor, but an ancestor-ish, knowing that I'm going to be in this ground again. And so again, this idea of possessing that, and it's difficult to possess that unless you belong in a place by being long multi-generationally. So in terms of that kind of similarity and distance between what is happening on continental space, continents, they push. You're still on the continent, but now you're under a different mountain. Us, you push, water. Yeah, so then we stay still, right? Or we hit the sand, or we move to Vegas. And so that kind of belonging and not belonging is different. It functions differently here because of that. Oh, sorry, that was long. Because I belong.
Thank you so much. I wanted to bring it back to the word identity. Can you guys speak more about what that means to you and your thoughts on the term?
Kim, I think you summarized my thoughts on it as well. It's very frustrating. I'll be honest, because it's baggage. Yeah, there's rights, possession, everything kind of channels back to whiteness. And yet we have to survive identity in a way, right? It's something that it's a frustrating companion to have to live with. But not the only companion. This is where, like, understanding that there's kuleana, there's that collective awareness, collective care, collective accountability, and the joy in that. I think, Kim, what you're talking about was like, yeah, and as well, Kaimi, there's a joy in talking about our relatives. We embody that when we do, right? And part of it is because it's a joy to be a part of a collective, a community, most of the time. Come over to my house on Sundays and you'll find some different stories. But I think for identity for me, I swim in with the queer folks, where identity, of course, is something that we try to challenge. Yeah. At the same time, white folks love to be queer and escape all the power dynamics and hide behind it, so that's not necessarily safe as well. I'm moving towards practice. I'm moving towards creating that relationship, not just with people, but also with our aina, with our land, with our more than human relatives. And I think that is where we can go, I don't want to say beyond, I want to go beneath, deeper than identity. Yeah, like ocean deep. I'm always afraid that whatever, I come from the Pele clan, so this is the volcano, and so my thoughts are volcanic. I am afraid that we will lose something of that emergent and molten core that's constantly producing aina, constantly producing new land. I'm afraid that concreteness will get trapped, possessed, built upon, and condominiumized. And so I think identity for me is a trap, I'll say it that way, that we are trying to get out of so that we can get to the depths of that relation, to remember the depths of the relation, and to practice new ones as well.
Yeah, one of the examples I give about why I recognize we're speaking English, and I don't want to censor people's words. I sometimes use the word identity, but I have this challenge to you. When you want to use that word, think if there's another way that you can say that. Because are you talking, an identity can mean your driver's license or your passport, your sexual orientation or all of that kind of thing. But for example, when people say something like, well, I was scooped, or in Canada there was this scooped era. Native children were forcibly adopted out, usually to white families, and somebody might speak about that as saying, I lost my identity. And I would say that statement, and I know people don't mean it this way, obviously, but that kind of way of putting things helps the settler then claim that identity like an object. And so what did you really lose? When you are a small child or a baby, you are ripped from your family. You lose your relationships, you might lose your parents, your grandparents, your cousins, you are losing relatives. And you're losing, and then all of the things that go with that. That is a much more, and then what that does is that indicates that the responsibility is on the settler state who ripped you from your family. When you say, I lost my identity, what you're doing is individualizing that, and you're putting the onus on yourself. And you are not the one that did that. The state is the one that did that to you, and they took all of those people away from you. You see how it's a much more complex statement when you're focusing on the action and on what the collective did to you and what they did to your collective, versus individualizing that in your own body, as if you have the agency to alone counteract the fact that you were ripped from your relations. And so this is why I ask us, when you want to choose that word identity, what are you really talking about? When you're saying, well, I want to reconnect to my identity, you want to connect with your family, right? Everybody has an identity. You may not like the identity that you have, right? You may wish you had another identity, but you don't lose an identity, you shift into another identity. So let's focus on what was really stolen from you. And I think by being critical of that word identity, we can get to the heart of the matter and really start talking about what really happened, versus always making everything about your own individual, well, I don't know what other word I would use for identity. I just don't like this word. I think it obscures the problem. And I think it lets the settler state off the hook.
Mahalo, and I think that like this question, that the verb that's happening in the identity, like think about the epistemic authority, who gets to determine identity, is happening right now in the news. Because you get plenty of people that according to the paperwork, they identify as American. Not according to ICE when they busting down your house and shipping your baby. You know what I mean? Like they identify as American, but to an American system, they do not, right? So who has the authority for this identity? This one might get in trouble, but this is what I say. I go like, in terms of, I am fit identifying, but fat presenting. Like I'm a chubby boy, but in my head, I'm fit identifying, right? And as much as I truly believe I am fit, my pants, my belt, and my shirt tell me I'm fat. You know what I mean? And that's the thing, right? Like who has the authority, especially as right now, because we're talking about in class today, I teach American politics, dangerous, yeah? But this idea of identity, who has the control of it, right? Like as it's going now, like I am American, I am this word, so that's why I like the practice, right? The practice of Americanity, perhaps. The practice of Hawai'i, that's why I like the whole Hawai'i. That there is this verb that is neither lost nor stolen. It's different acts that happen upon and with. There's collusion, but at the same time, like people will claim, my language was stolen. Pick it back up then. It's on the floor. You know what I mean? Like it's not that far away. Like it's how, but I go, it's complex. And again, it comes with different layers of trauma because we're forced, right? Like in kindergarten, you separate into boys on the left, girls on the right, because when we speak English, I have to know what is in your crotch before I even talk to you. Because I have to know if I say he or her, or she or him. But in Hawai'i, I don't need to know what your happy parts are doing, or what they are. Yeah, you still an oya. So when we're in these spaces that teach us to sort by size and color, right? From our earliest of ages, we're inculcated into that. Then this idea of identity, I am a little brown bear that sits in this there. You know, like, I am a circle, I am a square, I am this need to identify, to categorize oneself, such that whatever I am as Brucey Kaimi Watson is translated in a way and I can be grouped by some other that has epistemic authority to define what it sees that I am. Does that make sense? That's a lot, Jack. Anyway, mahalo. Thank you. Good question.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask the audience really quickly, who here is a student at the university? Who is faculty? Who is a community member? Thank you so much for sharing. I just wanted to redirect us to some questions that were asked through the Google form. And the first one I'll start with is, why has this concept become especially urgent in this political and academic moment?
I'd want to ask what they meant, especially urgent. Meaning, there's two, meaning especially urgent because we can finally talk about it, or has it proliferated more? I'm not sure what they mean. Like, are there more than there used to be? It's a good question. Do either of you have a?
No, because I like this idea of the promiscuity and the ability for us to talk about it now. Right? It's a little bit safer for us to talk about it now, but also because of the promiscuity, it has bred and bred and bred and bred. Right? I go, the idea, that's why I love it. I go, your word promiscuity is so perfect. Because it is, it breeds and it grows. And then right now when, especially for Hawai'i, I can say, a place that's a native Hawaiian place of learning, and like I said, Hawaiian is a haole word, but look at who is determining what is Hawaiian. Watch me get busted again, right? The president of our university system and the governor of Hawai'i have been here, if you look temporally, for 5 minutes, right? Like, Hensel had moved here 2 years ago, right? And she's making the decisions of what a Native Hawaiian place of learning should look like, right? And then you look at Dr. Green, whose children are Hawai'i, right? But ultimately, the governor that is the boss of that system, again, gets to make a determination of what we are and this, this label of not just people, but of spaces. And then also this idea of urgency is because of the bull effery that we have experienced through like Indigenous boarding schools and the trauma of that. We have a lot of, there's a quote, nostalgia is history without moral reckoning. And we had a lot of nostalgia, but we haven't yet done the moral reckoning to understand what it means. Like for me, in Hawaii and all this America, Malu, and ice thing that's happening, I sing songs, and our cousin in Tahiti sings songs, and our cousins in Rarotonga and the Cook Islands sing songs that are identical. We sing songs to each other. We're in the same time zone. But our cousins in French-occupied, the Tahiti Maohi Nui, speak French, right? Their colonizers French, so they know more about France. And the Cook Islands is like New Zealand, London, like that kind of thing. And then we are here. But if our cousins in Rarotonga or Tahiti want to come to school here, they have to apply for a visa. And if their visa have to expire, they have to hide from ICE. But somebody from Wisconsin and California can cartwheel back and forth to Hawaii like it's catching a bus, right? But our cousin, again, that has genealogy tied to these islands, as my genealogy is tied to their islands. And again, we sing songs in our languages. When I go to Tahiti, I cannot speak French to save my life. I can say, poisson cru avec du frites. So I can order raw fish and French fries. That's all I can do because it's my favorite thing to eat. But I speak Hawaii, add some T's and some R's, waha'a and afa'a and ara'a. And Asada we're talking together. But they are hiding from ICE. They are having difficulty getting visas because of this current regime. And others that are from, Wisconsin do not. And so in terms of now we can talk about it, now it's becoming more aware because, like was said earlier, white people are more aware of the illusion of politics and the application of borders and the illusion even of identity and who is controlling that. So if we're going to talk about why it's especially urgent, I like the fact that now we can, and because these things are happening as well, if that makes sense.
I mean, I can just add real quick. Kim said it, and I think right when we're talking, when the picture about ICE was on the slide. Those are self-indigenizers. They're so self-indigenized that it is impossible for them to think beyond that. And that emphasizes and highlights that this isn't just like this side project, which I hate when folks do that. It's a way, again, to excuse the issue so you don't have to look at the accountability, right? When you say that what ICE is doing comes from a place of folks who have self-indigenized for centuries at the expense of Kanaka Maoli on Moku, it makes the consequences deadly and pervasive towards our other relatives and our other communities that we are in relation to. So it is not a small project. That is the result of what Kim, Kaimi, and all the folks who speak out and report against self-indigenization are trying to prevent. That's the connection for me. Yeah, when you stop it at this level and try something different, right? Do something that's not that, we don't end up with the violence that we're having to deal with on the daily.
Something I talked about yesterday was, and Phil Deloria does this in this book, so it's interesting, even though he doesn't talk about pretendianism, the history really helps us understand how we get to this moment. He really looks at the transition during the civil rights movement in the US from the kind of the melting pot ideology that had come before that. And then suddenly you've got all these different groups fighting for rights. You've got this resurgence of, black pride and red pride and all this stuff. And at this moment, whiteness enters a moment of crisis, right? It's the ennui of whiteness. It's the feeling of meaninglessness. They're looking for meaning. And there's anthropologists as well as historians that have talked about this. And so there's that, and then there's also, if you look at this moment, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission moment in Canada in 2015, suddenly there's a flood of resources for indigenization in Canada. And you've got this real kind of ideology of multiculturalism, right? But it is fascinating, and so that's the moment when I get to Canada. That's the only Canada I know. But when I talk to Indigenous people who are obviously from there and there before that, this is a very different moment when suddenly there is just a flood of resources into Indigenous programming. There's a ton of job opportunities, and you can actually script a job opportunity in Canada for Indigenous applicants only. And they see just this huge peak now we've had many, many self-indigenization cases in universities there, and it really ramped up since 2015 into just the flood of resources and it becomes more profitable. And that's, so there's both the financial benefits and the social capital benefits, right? Being able to speak for people. And this is also, the way is prepared for this in this kind of 1960s moment when the melting pot thing kind of goes away and we get this, upsurge in quote-unquote ethnic pride. So there's multiple reasons why this happens that I think are both historical and structural and ideological, and also just flat out have to do with how profitable can this be for people. So.
Thank you for sharing. I wanted to ask Dr. Johnnson, during your time here at UH, and what are common mistakes you see in non-Indigenous scholars make when engaging with Indigenous communities, even when the intentions are good? Yeah, so sorry about that. What are common mistakes you see non-Indigenous scholars make when engaging with Indigenous communities, even when intentions are good?
I think I'll answer one thing, because there's a lot. I'm going to get in trouble with this. That's fine. I'm not in the academy anymore. Okay, yes, that's the trauma. I can get through it. Not focusing on your own, folks, there is a large contingency of white supremacists, fascists, who I, with all my degrees, cannot fathom why, what, how. I can't. I'm not a white person. I'm not that. I can't connect that way. I can't do that work. When I want to turn to non-Kanaka, and I'm going to be real specific, white scholars for help on this in the Hawaii context, I have 2 people on my list. And we can get into the Asian settler colonialism thing as well, and maybe that list is a little bit bigger. But there is not enough research on y'all's own community that we can, well, not we, that y'all can use to stop this shit from happening, okay? I'm not saying that the research will end things, but it can provide us better, at least as activists, it can provide us a better grasp of what to do in terms of strategy, tactics, community organizing, defense. I do not have those resources right now. So if you folks, I'm study what you want, I'm not here to police that, but we really need folks to be talking to your own communities, researching this and getting that information out. Caveat, without the privileges of being an expert, with the visibility, because that's a whole nother thing. You might dodge the self-indigeneity thing, self-indigenizer. There's a whole nother privilege and issue that comes when you become that expert person. Do it in a way that is not so visible, that is still caring, but not for the accolades, not for that CV, And I think this is the core for it for me. We don't have enough of that. I don't have enough for that. I have people asking, what do I do? I'm like, don't ask me, ask your people. They say, we asked our white community, and they don't know either. They don't have the resources, they don't have any leads. So there is a huge puka, there's a huge hole and vacancy, lacuna, whatever you want to call it there. Can we get some of that? Yeah.
Thank you to our panelists for those thoughtful reflections. Now at this time, we will open the conversation to questions from the audience. I will ask, just because we do have a lot of members in the audience, that you keep your question just to 1 to 2 sentences. If you would like to ask a question, if you would raise your hand, we will call on you and you may stand and ask your question. And then also please clarify who you are directing your question towards. So, does anyone have any questions they would like to ask our panelists? Okay, let's start over here.
Oh, distancing themselves from whiteness by hiding behind the queer folks distancing themselves from whiteness by, is it on? Hello? There we go. Got it. Distancing themselves from whiteness by hiding behind queer identity. And so I have a question about poly non-monogamous folks doing similar things, and specifically thinking about how people are willing to show up for putting in the time for building safety and consent in communities, and also how certain bodies are sort of prioritized for access and safety in those spaces. So that's my question.
Okay. Yes, great question. Yeah, so one of the things I just want to be clear, like when we talk about like hiding behind queerness and distancing from whiteness, my thing is like I always ask the question like, how are queer Kanaka doing? You know, like, do we feel the belonging? Do we feel the part of the community? Ask a couple of my mahu nibblings, and I can guarantee you it's tough right now. Not only from non-Kanaka, who are transphobic, queerphobic, etc., polyphobic, but also from our own, who have internalized much of the propaganda. Okay, that on the side. With poly relations, there's just so much shit that goes on. It's like a petri dish, a microcosm of all the isms and hierarchy and asymmetrical power relations that arise within it. But it touts itself as this like liberatory, like white poly will do this liberatory like relation, and we don't look at, where did all this research and knowledge about poly come from? Oh, wow, a lot of it's from Hawaii. A lot of it is extracted from my kupuna, my ancestors. Yeah, so one, looking at the base of it, that's the beginning, like for much of like mainstream, I guess, poly. But again, a lot of that asymmetrical power relations come up, and that includes people who use poly as a way to bypass dealing with the issue of self-indigenization. This happens with Hanai as well, for those who know, adoption. And it happens with, again, that absorption of our culture, our kinship, and then the utilization of it to bypass dealing with the power dynamic. That for me is the key. That doesn't mean like I've have lovers across the many spectrums, but poly is a place for me where, hell, you better be practicing like whatever it is that we're stopping self-indigenization. That's where it happens. It needs to happen there, and it needs to spiral out into the it needs to, for me, ethically, it needs to also influence everything in your life. That's what happens for me. Like a lot of things that we practice in our relationship is what we try to do within the community, and vice versa, bringing back the things we learn in the community back to our relations, yeah? But it's tough. It is not the cinematic version that we all tune into. I'm not gonna name the shows that I watch. But do you know what I'm saying? Like, and again, that priority over safety, yeah? A lot of bypassing goes, for example, women, other non-binary folks. There's some twisted things that occur where the use of Maoliness or indigeneity as an excuse to do unethical things, right? Or vice versa, the settlement of the relationship to hide over those kinds of relationships. It creates unsafe conditions, the similar unsafe conditions that happen outside of the poly relation within our larger society. So I think that's for me what it is there is a loop that happens, true, the sign. There is a connection between, our relations are political, poly is political. All, like, if we are not politicizing that, we're not stopping self-indigeneity, if we're not creating safer relationships within our relations, and there will be mistakes, absolutely, there will be harm done, that's guaranteed. But if we're not practicing those in that relationship, you're doing this service to my kupuna. Do not colonize our relations that way, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. I believe we had another question in the back, the gentleman in the back. We're gonna have the microphone brought up to you. Thank you. I think
Taking the mic up.
on this side to the left.
I didn't really, don't really remember what the question was, but I will say, I had a Two-Spirit colleague, scholar up in the prairies of Canada, call me up and say, so who's going to talk about queer Tendians? I said, you talk about it. So it is, it has been harder to call out queer and trans in self-indigenizers because, you know, the response will often be, you're transphobic or queerphobic. I do know there are a group of queer Indigenous scholars on the mainland who know this is a problem, and there may be some new work coming out or panels at conferences on this to talk about it. Yeah, and I think queer scholars need to do that. Yeah, queer Indigenous scholars.
Add real quick to that one. Recently I forget what it's called, but it's good. Was Emu, the one about the queer Hawai'i one, you guys know? Emu Kahikina. Boom. What Kiki Kuka, what? Kaka.
Yeah, Kuka Kuka podcast.
Yeah, Kuka Kuka, but Kiki was in it too, because like the Mahu word Kiki. But what Kina said, and we went to school, Indigenous boarding school together, what she said was, all these things about Mahu, she's always been Hawaii, who she is first. She's always been Hawaii first. This Mahu label, that the identity of Mahu came from outside, and she wears that and does the activism for the Mahu thing, but at the core, beyond that, again, without the parts, without the other things, the core is where she stands is this, the practice that she claims is Hawaii. These other adjectives come from outside. So yeah, I just want to add that for a second, because I thought that was, I go, that makes sense. And it's consistent when mistakes go.
Dr. TallBear.
Oh, you turn more.
Dr. TallBear, 20 years ago, roughly, Professor Ward Churchill of the University of Colorado spoke in this very auditorium. In your estimation, was he guilty of appropriation and self-indigenization when he claimed to be part Native American?
Yeah, I think that's been shown. I think it was Jody Rave who broke that story, who may have been a student reporter at University of Colorado at the time. She's from one of the South Dakota tribes, I can't remember which one. Yeah, I mean, he's a well-known case. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I've also talked to other older Indigenous women who were around back then, and I mean, people knew. And then Jody Ray broke the case, but that's an old one, so I haven't read up on the literature. Yeah, total self-indigenizer.
My question is for Dr. TallBear. You opened with a couple statements, I think it was concerning Anishinaabe or maybe Turtle Island, regarding some rules or laws that were enforced such that white women, if they married outside of the tribe, were taken off the tribe and lost their status, whereas the inverse was the case for white men who married in.
That was Indian status in Canada. It was a federal law.
Oh, thank you. Okay, can you maybe say more about that and also how it might relate to the Indian censuses that occurred at the turn of the century?
No, I mean, because I'm not from Canada, I'm really from the US, but I was in Canada for 10 years. The point I was making was that self-identification became this really important thing for Indigenous people in Canada because of the Indian Act, right? Wherein Indigenous women would lose their status if they married a non-Indigenous man. And for example, a white woman could become an Indian on paper if she married an Indigenous man. And not only would you lose your status, you wouldn't be able to live on the reserve. We don't have a rule like that quite in the US. I don't remember what your question was after that.
Oh, I think it was just clarification on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, and I went through it fast. I was just giving that as an example of the political history against which self-identification emerges as something that's really important to Indigenous people in Canada. And then you get to this moment when you realize how self-identification has gone so far that you really have a lot of very prominent people in Canada, some of the stars of the Indigenous literary world, political world, Buffy St. Marie in music. This is in part enabled by runaway self-identification. It becomes a free-for-all. And so, but this is a really hard moment for Indigenous people in Canada to say we need something, we can't rely on self-identification anymore because it had been a liberatory kind of move against federal Indian status. You know, this is how it emerges as something important, and then now it has this serious downside, and so that was really difficult for people. That's one of the things that's so difficult there for people in reckoning with this. Yeah.
Hi. This question is for you, Dr. Kahala. It's ironic that we're standing, is this called the John Young building? No. Or is that close by? I don't know, I was looking on Google Maps. That's an example of self-indigenization. I have a question for you because I know that you went to Canada. That's one of the reasons why I'm here. I had a question about servants and slaves that were taken from here, Indigenous people of this place in the islands, if you heard anything. I know that I read that they were forced to marry into Indigenous tribes, and they were adopted by the First Nations. And so along the question that she had about women that were married into non-Indigenous groups, including Kanaka, were they also taken out of the reservation? I'm just curious. That's my question.
I don't know anything about this history, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I am an American, ultimately. Like it or not.
So this question is directed at Dr. Kaimi Watson. Briefly, you had mentioned how today, for Kanaka communities, we have the idea of Jesus love, right? And so going along with self-indigenization for the person, how do we fight back against the indigenization of Western ideas? For example, Kamehameha, right? I'm also a graduate. And they portray our indigenous values like ha'aha'a, generosity, as one and the same with values under the Bible, keakua. How do we split that apart and make that distinction that these are indigenous values prior to contact, and how do we spread that narrative here and within First Nations?
That is basically like my work. When you're saying like what you're called to do, that's been my work because the people that were here. I went to this indigenous boarding school, and I was taught at this indigenous boarding school that I never have aloha, that I never have ha'a, and that I had to do United States ROTC because of my school that was founded by a princess of the Hawaiian Kingdom. I had to be American, right? Like, so the dissonance, and I was a feral child, so I never had much discipline. They put me in boarding because I never had mommy and daddy, and so they thought they'd give me discipline. It didn't work, they kicked me out of boarding. But with that, so like my work that I do is, like I said, like haole has been a Hawaii word, but when the Andrews Dictionary possessed it and identified it and claimed it and put it on paper, haole seemed to mean whiteness because they put themselves into everything. So there's words like, yeah, like ha'a, kua paka'a, chants down and like starts this tidal wave to knock something down while being ha'a. While, like, so ha'a never meant be the, what is that name? Homer Simpson in the bush. Yeah, disappearing memes. Right? It means, right? And then so I talk about the word haumia. And so for me, the base of all my work is defining these values, and you'll see, what I think and how I think is grounded in mo'olelo and cultural practice. I have the unique ability to have loved these things for a long time, and to love mo'olelo, and to engage in mo'olelo in Nupepa. And so when you see the words as it's used in those words, as you see the words as it's used in a chant, in practice, in dance, and I like, that doesn't mean what the dictionary says it means. Like that dissonance, I walk through the world seeing dissonance constantly. And so yeah, like haumia is told, like wahine are made to feel dirty. Yeah, you haumia because you have your period. You cannot do this because you haumia. If you look at the word haumia as it's used in the mo'olelo of Keaumelemele, haumia is, no even an English word for it. Haumia is this kaoha, this burden, this request placed on the past, this responsibility placed from the past on the present. The person in the present does something wrong that doesn't have a repercussion now, but has a repercussion in the future. That's haumia. So it's, I made a mistake in the present that the future generation will have repercussions for. So like Red Hill is a good example of haumia. Right? A kaoha from the past to pay attention and aloha aina. Somebody in 1960 said, let's put some chip fuel, right? Did 1960 drink the poison water? No, 2024 did. Right? So no even an English word. So when you're using, again, go back to, we are blessed with this archive of not just written in Nupepa, but written in bodies. Right? Those that dance and sing songs that they learn from generation to generation. And go back to that, because everything else is this illusion that has been placed upon us. And kamehameha, right? What is that thing? The one Porteous used to be? What is that word? Eugenics. Eugenics was taught at Kamehameha schools as a science class. There's a chapter in the book, Eugenics for Young People, written specifically for the indigenous boarding school students, and you're on chapter that says to a remnant. The Hawaiians once did. Because again, like Dr. TallBear said, the more we're dead, the more we're in the past, the more better able they are to say that this is their homeland, and to redefine words for us, such that Pila can use the word aloha in a sentence better than Haunani can, and that's made him more Hawaiian than her. Right? So we have all the resources, but it takes the work. At the same time, you have Native Hawaiian Place of Learning. The Manoa Philosophy Department is, I have so many verbs and adjectives that I can use on the violence that they have committed against me and against Hawaii as the boy that teaches Hawaii philosophy in the philosophy department. I'm the first Pacific person, not just in Hawaii, but on the planet, to teach a philosophy class in their philosophy using those language resources. Why doesn't the Native Hawaiian Place of Learning want a Hawaii philosopher that has practice, that has history, that has language teaching these values? Power. Yeah. Mahalo.
Thank you, Maddox, for your question. Did we have any more from the audience?
Aloha, my name is Hawai'i Moai. My question is directed towards Dr. Kahala Johnnson and also Dr.
Known as Chris Anderson, who is the former Dean of the Faculty of Native Studies, and he is now Dean of Social Sciences and Humanities. And he's giving a talk called, Why Universities Produce So Many Pretendians. And he has a structural analysis about, I can tell you conceptually as somebody who studies this what some of their incentives are, but he's actually trying to figure out and as our administrators at the University of Saskatchewan, University of British Columbia, University at McGill University, they've gone through 4, 5, 6, 7 years now of figuring out you've got to work with labor lawyers, you've got to work with unions, you've got to work with decision makers who are largely non-Indigenous, who are looking at this through a lens that is not embedded in our community. So you really do need to figure out what are the levers you can push within the institution to change policy. There is no policy on the books at the university to hold pretendians to account. It is not easy to translate it into academic dishonesty or academic misconduct. So you've got to find the people, particularly lawyers and policy people and people in administration, who can figure out how to translate this into a policy the university can enforce. So I think what Chris Anderson would say is, it's not really about changing their morality, meaning the morality of the decision makers. It's about helping them find ways within the university structure to put some policies and procedures on the books. This is really unsexy stuff, but it's really necessary, right? So Chris is going to come down and give that keynote, and then he's got a new escape room role-playing exercise where he gets a bunch of university administrators in a room for a morning or a day, and he gives them a hiring scenario. And actually the hiring scenario involves a queer candidate who's self-indigenizing, and the university instructors or the administrators have to go through and sort of do this role play about how they would do the hiring. And Chris Anderson says it's really interesting. The Indigenous people in the room, the Indigenous administrators, right away get who the pretendian is, and the non-Indigenous ones don't. So there's some interesting differences going on in the perceptions. So I would say get some experts from Canadian universities who are willing to talk to your administrators about it, because they genuinely don't have a clue about what to do, and they're very uncomfortable with this conversation, right? Something you said earlier, I think white people are intensely fascinating. I study white people. I don't think we're interesting at all. We're just regular, everyday people. They're the exotic ones. And so I think, I agree, white people need to help out with this project. And so Daryl LaRue, who, has anybody read Daryl LaRue? He wrote a book called Distorted Descent. He is a white He's French Canadian. He comes from that same stock. They go back to just a few ancestors in Quebec. And these are his people. All of these self-indigenizers in the eastern part of Canada are French Canadian people. And they may have 4 Indigenous women back around 1640 that they're hearkening to. So Daryl is taking on all of these French Canadians who are self-indigenizing in his books, in his articles. He's writing a second book. And I've had Indigenous people say to me, who does he think he is addressing this problem and talking about this? These are his people. Who's going to write on these self-indigenizers but him, right? So there's a couple answers. You white people who are in community with these people that are doing this, it might be your responsibility to look at your own and figure out what they're doing. And then from the side of within the university, I think getting some administrative technical expertise. I hate to put them on the spot, but I'm bringing a bunch of them down to Minnesota. And so I'm doing this symposium. You know, if there's an administrator in this room that wants to just understand more about the problem and how we got to here and what some of the potential solutions are, come to the symposium. I've got an online option as well if you don't want to come to Minneapolis because you're nervous about the danger in the streets. So, yeah.
Yeah, first off, thank you for saying that, for being able to say hard things with the cost of retaliation, which I'm sure you've faced. My apologies. I've been pushed out of movement space, off social media for 5 years because of retaliation. Hence why I find it fascinating as a way to deal with my trauma. I think Kim talked about the institutional part. I'll talk about dual power, right? Institution side and then the community side. I believe that using direct action tactics, campaigning, organizing, activist tactics for this issue is important. On one end, you know, normally I would suggest like community accountability process, which means you make sure that folks are reporting or like you are supported. You have a group of people who can defend against those kinds of retaliation. 1, 2, having a group within the community of folks who are sympathetic, who are versed in being able to handle these kinds of cases. I don't think that might be possible here. I've seen things go really south because people fall upon different lines and are not skilled and practiced to be able to do that. However, that is an option. And then another thing is like if the person is willing to undo the harm, getting what you folks need, what we need as Kanaka, to stop self-indigenization in a material way. Not just symbolically, not just I write an apology, but like the hard work of returning those grants, that funding, those opportunities, those privileges back to community, which does not take, you know, a ChatGPT written apology that you post on a website. It takes hard work, material and financial commitment. Barring that, direct action, creative action. If the person is resistant, as I'm sure he is, given the pattern, it may be useful to apply political pressures in finding lawyers to be able to create a defense so that, you know, defamation, again, we are criminalized. We can be criminalized for calling out self-indigenizers, but self-indigenizers have no, like, there's no recourse. That's the asymmetry, yeah. So having lawyers to defend, just like with any activist movement, applying political pressure at points of intervention. So when self-indigenizers get really famous, they also open up all sorts of avenues and opportunities to intervene within their self-indigenization. So talks, invited speeches, fest packs, all sorts of things. They open themselves up and actually become vulnerable because of that status that's given to them and that they have access to. Each of those represents targets that you can apply pressure to. Yeah? But you need community. And that's the hardest part, is that in this, we need to, both us as Kanaka, we need to do our work on resisting those kinds of retaliation, but more than us, it's actually, and this is a labor question, those who are non-Kanaka, who are settlers, need to do this work. Hold your own accountable. If you're a settler of color, Come for your guy. Find folks, build a community so that we're not the ones that constantly have to do the work, get pushed out of movement space, get harassed and put down and excluded by our own kin, online or in person. Do the hard work. That is worthy work. That is being a good ancestor. That is giving us stories of people who are accountable and holding their own. So I think that's what I would say. Treat it as like a campaign. And gosh, Andre taught me what I know. So I guess this is a ho'i return back. But yeah, but make sure you are secure. That's either institutionally or in the community. Make sure you're secure, not just legally, but in relationships around you, because it's a long fight. And learn from survivors. Learn what survivors have to go through. Because that's where that knowledge is. That's that long knowledge from colonization and even before that, all the way to the present. Learn what survival strategies are there and treat it like a campaign. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, everyone. We have time for one more question.
I just wanted to ask this question, kind of ties it back to UH. I kind of have been seeing examples of what looks to me like self-indigenization on this campus. You know, all the white students walking around barefoot, they come to Hawaii and all of a sudden become surfers, putting Hawaii base in their bios and inserting themselves in these places where you would never normally see them. But it's because of this campus that attracts that crowd here that will insert themselves into these places that, you know, they have no business being in. I wanted to know if, I know that talked a lot tonight about that they should hold their own community responsible. If kind of an open question, would you guys think that this is a thing that needs to be held accountable within their own community, in the UH community, or something that we can do as a bigger lahui to address this problem? Because I do think it's harmful, and I do think that these are the people that they don't get called a haole, and then they come and they do these things and they end up staying because they feel so comfortable being here and taking on this weird identity that they create for themselves.
I think that UH does, make Manoa yours, the most diverse university on the planet. In my classes, I asked them, raise your, and this is what I got in trouble for last week, so. But I had, people, like 100 people, I said, raise your hand if you're Hawai'i or if you're a Pacific Islander. And had 5 people out of 100. That's not diversity, that's perversity, right? Because how does whatever this is that is UH Manoa, that has where Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have been minoritized, true violence, true economic violence, true access, right? But then UH Manoa says the most diverse, I'm going to go to school and there's going to be people of different colors, right? I'm going to embrace the rainbow, I'm a citizen of the world, right? Like, that's how they're coming with. And that's not evil. That's not their fault, right? It's UH again. UH is advertising it like that, right? You're not going to blame the customer. You eat that, McDonald's selling Happy Meal, I eat the Happy Meal, right? There's this relationship that's happening between the two. But Phyllis Turnbull, watch me, I'm going to swear. Everybody okay? Closing ears. But Phyllis Turnbull, who was a professor here, said there's like 3 levels of haole. So again, only haole people have defined haole, and she was haole. But she said, haole is somebody that has this idea for it. Then there is dumb haole, someone that makes like a cultural faux pas because they come from someplace else, so like they come to a Hawaiian house and don't take their slippers off. But you tell them that, oh shit, sorry, I'm gonna do it next time, right? That's a dumb haole, right? Mistake, but I'm gonna correct. Then the 3rd level is a dumb fucking haole. And the dumb fucking haole was the one, even though you tell them, no wear your slippers in the house, they're like, it's my right to wear these slippers. I paid $1,000 for my plane ticket to get here. So in this idea of howliness, and that's why I say haole is not a race, but this idea of resonant versus dissonant. Yeah, it's like sound. Hawaii is a world of sound. You know what I mean? Because none of our stuff was text. If I like tell you something in Hawaii, we have to share space and share time. And so in this shared space and shared time, it's when I'm sharing space and sharing time with them that I can correct and I can. At the same time, what we can do, like what you're saying, like, and then we're talking about like the pressures, is tell UH, knock it off. Because again, this idea of diversity, if we're not like, you can argue for the next 200 years if this is America or not. But I would bet my left hand, my right lung, and my left testicle, all on the line, all in, that this is an island in the middle of the Pacific. So with that in mind, now let's talk about diversity. You know what I mean? Now let's talk about this idea of belonging and being long, and then how to behave while you're here. That's what we have control over, and as Hawaii, that's what we have control over. But at the same time, right, it's kind of not their fault for being ignorant, because they were taught ignorance. This ignorance that exists all around us is on purpose. I always, because my specialty is ignorance, huh? So I go east-west road, run north to south, right over here, right? People have problems with me saying swear words. Again, that's why I got in trouble a couple weeks ago, so buckle up. I go, I am currently speaking a language from Europe on an island in the middle of the Pacific. And when I speak this European language, I have an accent which can be perceived as coming from the North American continent. If you're not paying attention to the fact that every sound that comes out of my mouth is violence and is testimony and is evidence of not just the genocide that happened before, but the genocide that is happening to my body and this aina as I'm not speaking the language that it knows. If you're not paying attention to that, then you're not fucking paying attention, right? So simple things like that, that we have to assert and kind of just bring into the room and call into conversation and invite them to conversation. No need to be an asshole about it, right? Because again, it's not their fault, and it's not our fault for never like, wow, why do I speak a European language? You know what I mean? Like that idea of exile being normalized. For Hawaii that have always been here, exile is off. Like leave their homeland. But for the Pilgrims, it's celebrated every Thanksgiving they had leave their homeland, right? They know that's normal. Oh, you're supposed to go abroad and learn of the world. That they devalue what it means to stay still and to be temporally and spatially where you are. So that's why I say, it's hard for hold it against people. At the same time, what gotta happen is that you create this malu and this bubble around you, such that you teach while you move. Does that make sense? I think that's what I have control of. And I think pressuring the university to control its marketing is also what we have control of, but that's all. Because again, not their fault sometimes.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the ignorance, it's annoying. We can admit it's annoying, it's irritating, and it's also violent because it's the type of microaggression that they're not even probably aware of. And the university, of course, as an institution promotes it, as Kaimi was saying. And I also believe that settlers are too comfortable. They're too comfortable right now. Back in Trask era, folks were shaking. Folks were calling, policing in because of things that what Kaimi would say right now. Yeah, they would come down with violence. They're too comfortable. But I think I'm going to say this because I'm out of the university. I believe that there's a students and then there's faculty and staff. And the self-indigenization, even if it's not overt, like I am a Hawaiian or Kanaka, it's more subtle. Like I associate myself and do these things that are Kanaka, and I practice these things like hula and chan and etc., all those things. Like that to me is a problem that stays. So the hippie Holly that walks around with the slippers, they hopefully will go, wherever and maybe take some classes that tell them why that's not a good idea. But I fear for the people, the faculty and staff who have the knowledge, they have access to all sorts of things that I currently do not. Subscriptions to knowledge bases, archives, studies, etc., about this issue and about colonization in general, who use the words, they say the words as if they're allies and comrades, but they do not embody that. And that to me becomes an issue because they get privilege, they get status, and they get visibility. And pay lots of money for that. I am in debt, I'm not in the academy, do not have tenure, do not plan to go back to the university, nearly unsheltered. Yeah, living on the couch. And I'm relatively privileged compared to other Kanaka. But settlers in the universities, faculty and staff who stay and are not doing the work, they're too comfortable. They're not doing the work of interrupting this in themselves, in their community of scholars, and in activist spaces that they come into. That is to me, not to make it worse, but that is the high intensity of what that hippie Holly without the shoes you talked about. All right, that's my answer to the question. I just wanted to say this end on this, but I didn't mention. It's important to recognize that self-indigenization, another product of that is not just ICE, but what we're seeing in Palestine. Yeah, what's continued to go on in Palestine. And I cannot ethically end what I'm saying tonight or without mentioning how violent this ongoing genocide is. And if you ever need a reason to prioritize this in your work, look to Palestine.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for asking your questions. Before we do our closing, I'm so sorry, we are just at time, but the panelists will be available after for questions. Before we do our closing, are there any final thoughts our panelists would like to share with our audience?
Oh, I don't remember the Trudell citation. Yeah, sorry about that. It's been a long time since I wrote that book.
It's just that we're in the middle of Moku that's
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Which is the entire
Yeah, I have so many things to say, that's why I'm not going to say it. It's like, yeah, there's so much to say. I appreciate being able to be in conversation with you too. I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And as we come to a close, I want to thank our panelists for guiding us through this conversation. I also want to extend my sincere thanks again to the student government, the staff, and Samantha for organizing and supporting this event. And thank you to everyone here for listening and taking the time to come down to campus outside of work and school hours. Conversations like this are essential because they bring visibility to issues that are often unseen or misunderstood by those who do not live them. For many people, these realities remain invisible unless they are intentionally named or discussed. How we approach these questions, how we ask them, how we conduct research, how we speak about these issues, and how we choose to move forward carries real significance. These choices matter deeply for Indigenous communities and for the people around the world who continue to live with the consequences of colonialism. Thank you again to everyone for being here and for your openingness to learn and listen to perspectives that may be unfamiliar. As we move forward, I hope this conversation encourages continued reflection on how we engage with these questions, how we listen to Indigenous voices, and how we carry this learning into work, our institutions, and our communities. Thank you.